Welcome, everyone. I'm here to talk about significant astrological and astronomical alignment that's happening on December 7th at the same time as a full moon. In fact, the full moon will be, I say, impacting that alignment pretty significantly. And this alignment happens about once every 25 to 26 months, on average every 780 days. So what is this that I'm talking about? This is the Mars-Sun opposition, or acronychal rise of Mars, the beginning of a new synodic cycle in the sign of Gemini. And this will begin episode 43 of Signs, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms. I'm your host, Erik Roth, shamanic astrologer, and this episode is the full moon Mars opposition. And this would be Mars in Gemini, the moon in Gemini, and the sun in Sagittarius. But first, I'd like to talk about the upcoming Pathseeker Mars online course that I'm doing. The first class is November 29th, 2022. You don't have to be there live, and let's say you learn about this after it starts, that's okay too. There's plenty to get from it, and you'll be able to get everything that you want out of it, and there'll be time for extra questions for me during the course as it's spread out over several months, including informal discussion groups in between the main classes. So you get a lot out of this video, 6 major classes, and then about 5 in between Zoom discussions with members of participants of this particular online course with me as well at the same time. So we'll be able to ask anything about astrology, about this online course, about the Mars opposition, about Mars's journey through the constellations, and any other alignments that might be going on astrologically coming up here. So plenty to talk about there, and I'll be sharing a link below in this in the description of this video here. And I would also point to the Mars and Gemini video that I did a few months ago, and I'll include a link for that video because that's got some additional information about Gemini and other things that I would definitely tune into that to watch that as well as this. So these two kind of go together in that way. So the last time that Mars had a opposition, an acronychal rise, which is when the sun is setting, a planetary or stellar body is rising opposite the sun in the east, the sun in the west, and the star and or planet in the east. That means it's an acronychal rise. It's rising in opposition to the sun, rising as the sun is setting. And the last time that happened in the sign of Gemini was 1990 on November 27th at 5 degrees 20 minutes Gemini. But at that time, it didn't spend a 7-month period in the sign of Gemini as this time period is doing between August 20th and March 25th, August 20th, 2022, March 25th of 2023. 1990, there was about a 2.5-week period of retrograded back into Taurus, and then in 1991 it went back into Gemini. But where it was fully in Gemini the whole time, you got to go back 47 years to 1975 to 76, when the opposition point was at 2658 Gemini. And but that wasn't during a full moon or a moon occultation of Mars, and neither was the 1990-1991 period. So this is part of what makes this a very unique expression of this Mars-Sun opposition point during the full moon. But this is also the beginning of a new Mars synodic cycle. So the word synod means, or synod, where the word synodic comes from is the word synod, which is a meeting place. And it's connected to like a relationship between celestial bodies. So it's on that sense, this is in this case Mars and the sun. The moon also has synodic cycles and sidereal cycles. Every planet out there has got synodic and or sidereal cycles. So we're looking at the synodic cycle in this case. And when it's in a particular sign like this, starting at when it spends a lot of months in a sign, then it starts a new cycle for about 25 to 26 months. And in this case, we call, in the shamanic astrology parlance, it's called a overstory. So it used to be called an overtone, but now we're moving into calling it an overstory. The last time this happened was October 13th, 2020, in the sign of Aries. And Aries, and now it's in the sign of Gemini in this year. So Aries and Gemini, very, very different. Aries is more on the sort of on the primal, physical, instinctual level, whereas Gemini is more on the mental, imaginative, and contrarian, sort of up in the head a lot. Very airy sign compared to a very fiery sign. So difference in years. Aries played a very significant role in the events of 2020, and its alignment there with Eris, and it's square to the Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, and the events that kind of blew up the world, if you will, and where paradigm change was happening there. With all the events that took place, all scrunched up into kind of 1 year, or less than a year, really. So, but this year, definitely very different feel to it, being in Gemini, and especially since Mars has been actively squaring this planet Neptune. That whole thing, I would refer back to that Mars and Gemini video that I did a few months ago for more information about that. So December 7, 2022, Mars experiences its next equinoctial rise, this time in the sign of Gemini, the new overstory. So back on October 30th, that's when Mars stationed retrograde between the horns of the bull. This is a really powerful area of the sky, full of really bright stars and very recognizable constellations. Aldebaran, the bull's eyes here at 10 degrees Gemini. We've got Pleiades here, right sitting between 29 Taurus and 0 degrees Gemini. We've got Castor and Pollux and the twins. We've got the Orion constellation just below that. And then the next slide I want to share is that opposition point. So we can see as it's coming up out of the ground, it looks like it's coming up out of Earth, the Moon and Mars will be in conjunction here. This is, of course, air on the west coast of the US, North America. You can also see Capella, which will rise before the Mars and the Moon. So you'll get to see that just before that, and then you'll get to see this. Now, this is just a symbolic graphic representation of the Moon's occultation and fullness covering up Mars. So this whole thing will be taking place. This is like, you might say, the scene with all the drama that's taking place in the sky and all the stars that are playing specific roles in this drama. And I've got the line here dividing. This is the seasonal line, or the line of the archetypes, Taurus and Gemini. So this is where the sun would be if it during the springtime when it's moving through Taurus. This is the ecliptic here. This particular line that Mars and the Moon are on here. This yellowish kind of line here, and then Gemini is over on this side. So all of this is Gemini here. So constellations and signs are different. So this is just want to make sure I get that in there for all of those who are like wondering, why is that? Why is Taurus and Gemini? Well, this is a different conversation altogether, and I have a video just specifically about zodiacal clarity, and there are other videos that also are on YouTube that you might be able to look up about the difference between signs and constellations, especially the one that Kaylin Castell has done, and I know that Daniel Giamario has done one as well. Okay, so let's look at some past, kind of in the more of a visual of past alignments of the Moon. I'm sorry, not the Moon, but Mars and the Sun, and how it looks from a heliacal, from a perspective of like the Sun here. So we have the equinoctial rise oppositions. So this is a graphic I get from astrostargate.com, who wrote about the the Mars oppositions from D.E. Jenkins. He created this graphic here, and it shows the different places in the in this orbit here. Here's Earth in the inner orbit of the sun, and then here's Mars. And you can see sometimes it takes a wider loop, and that is because Mars does not have a perfectly circular orbit. It has a more elliptical orbit, and the reason that is because it's a bit closer to Jupiter, and so Jupiter kind of tugs on it a little bit more, and so it kind of pulls it away from the sun just a bit more to give it this wider orbit than Earth. I mean, Jupiter has an impact on Earth as well, but it's not near as great as it is with Mars. So here's the 2020 opposition, relatively close. Here's the 2022. You can see it starts to get farther. In fact, Mars is getting, at each opposition, it's getting less bright and less bright until it reaches this area in 2027. And this should be 2029, actually, here. And then 2031, it starts to come back and get a little bit brighter on the opposition points. 2018 was really bright, but the brightest in at least recorded history is from 2003, and that's when Mars reached nearly or minus 2.9 in magnitude. And there are going to be future years where it will get that bright again in the decades to come. So after the 2020s, it will go through again where we'll get bright in the 2030s. Okay, so here's the Mars retrograde loop. This is just a graphic that shows what Mars was doing as it zips by, coming direct from here back in September, late August, September here, stops right just after it passes between the horns of the bull, and then retrogrades back near Aldebaran. So you get a comparison of a very bright Mars and the bright star in the Bull constellation, and then it directs back and gets in the Twins by late March and early April. So here's some other data here around the Mars opposition. Got the full moon at 1601. This should be actually Gemini, because the sun, that's where I meant to put the sun in there. This should be Gemini. And the Sun-Mars opposition, all three of them are in Gemini, not Sagittarius. I was thinking about the sun and its conjunction with Venus. I've got a chart that shows that in there. But the full moon here at 1601 Gemini, this is at 8:08 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So in Europe, it's going to be on December 8th, and Asia as well. The Moon-Mars conjunction, only 11 minutes later. So we have a full moon, we have the Moon-Mars conjunction, only 11 minutes later, and then the Sun-Mars opposition. Now, what's interesting is that the actual Moon-Mars occultation will happen between this Moon-Mars conjunction, and which is just at the beginning, and this the actual Sun-Mars opposition point. So, and the Sun-Mars, of course, will be on the Pacific coast. It'll be December 7th, but on the east coast of the U.S. and Canada, it'll be December 8th. So December 8th in Europe, Asia, and Africa. So, and Australia as well, obviously. But these are the times. So like if you're on the West Coast, we've got an hour-and-a-half period where all three of these events are taking place. Actually, we can call it a fourth event. So we add in the occultation with that. So all of that happening at the same time. Roughly, astronomically, it's pretty close. And there isn't anything that has come really that close to it in recent centuries. In fact, I go on one of my slides that are coming up. We haven't had an occultation at the Mars-Sun opposition since the 17th century, actually. But there will be a couple more this century. We're actually in a time where that is happening a little, like a few of them in this century. We did have in 1969 a full moon, but there wasn't an occultation. So we're going to get some of that going on here. So okay, so why don't we take a look at this one first, since since I'm bringing up this topic, I'm kind of switching gears a little bit. Okay, so the next ones that will happen, 2059 and 2078, when there's an occultation, a Mars-Sun opposition, or aka acronychal rise, and a full moon. And they're going to happen in different signs. So 2059 will be in Virgo, and in 2078, it'll be in Scorpio. In fact, 2076 is also one that will happen just inside Virgo, but it's not an occultation, and it's at least a little more than a day off from a full moon. But if you go back to 2007, we actually had, again, this century, we've had that. 2007, we had an occultation, but it wasn't as close. It wasn't exactly at the same time as the full moon like it is this time around. We can see less than a degree at the Mars opposition. The moon is less than a degree away. So it's all really, really close. Now, this brings up an interesting point, is that the moon itself in the sky is only about a half a degree from, like, at its widest point in the sky, just as the sun is. So it will take usually about an hour, if it's right in the middle, for like it to occult a planetary body. Sometimes it's only several minutes, where it's like at the bottom end of one of the poles of the moon. But this time it's actually going to be a really lengthy occultation. The moon tends to occult stars pretty much every year, and sometimes planets, like it's doing this year. It's occulting Uranus a few times also this in 2022. But in 1969, this was the closest I could find in the last couple of centuries where Mars and the moon are really within a few hours of like full moon to Mars-Sun opposition. But that was an occultation. 2007, there was, but it wasn't quite as close. So you can pause this and kind of look at some of the data here. But this is really interesting because you can go back to, I recommend actually John Muse, who wrote this series of books called Astronomical Mathematical Morsels, which go into all this data about all these very intriguing, especially about eclipses, but also planetary alignments and when they would happen, and kind of rare ones like occultations at the time of a Mars opposition. Well, he was listing 2078 and 2059. He also listed, I think he listed 2007, and then he listed ones from the 17th century as well. So these are things that you can, when you look at some of this information, because I like looking to see what, looking at patterns and see what was going on. And so this requires a little more research to see like the multi-century pattern and why they come in groups, and kind of look at that whole formula and see that pattern take shape. Because of Mars's very elliptical orbit, it's a very irregular pattern so far that I've discovered. All right, so here's the natal chart of December 7th. This is the Mars opposition point. We can see the moon is already past the fullness, but not too far. Now, again, I was only talking about exact fullness, but shamanically speaking, the moon looks full in the sky for about a 3-day period. So it's not like you'll on December 6th, it'll look full. On December 8th, it'll look full, maybe even a little bit on the 9th as well, because this happens, late in the evening on the 7th. But we can see opposite in Sagittarius, we can see Hygeia and Venus also in Sagittarius. So they're kind of loosely opposite Mars and the moon here. In fact, at this point, Venus has already come up in the evening sky. So as Mars is rising, Venus will just appear for a little while after the sun sets. So it'll be interesting dynamic. You'll have this Venus on one side and Mars on the other side with the moon under a full moon. This is, again, the more you throw in there, the more rare it is. Now, Hygeia, an asteroid, very large asteroid actually, is not visible to the naked eye, and isn't even when it's at its opposition point, when it's closest to Earth. But it is worth noting because that has to do with wellness and health and well-being, and to some degree healing. Venus has to do with the feminine expression, sort of the inner goddess that is coming online, coming to life, and we have this new Mars expression here. So we have Mars and Venus that are able to see each other. Gemini and Sagittarius, trailmates, coming online and looking and going, hey, there's an adventure that awaits. And in fact, when we get to July, they actually get close together. They don't quite get into exact conjunction, but they get within about 5 degrees of each other. So that's something that for those sky watchers and planet watchers out there, stargazers, you're going to be seeing Venus catching up relatively quickly in 2023 to Mars. And Mars will be a lot less bright. Meanwhile, Venus will be very, very bright. But then Venus will start to retrograde back and doesn't quite get to where Mars is. In fact, that's a whole different kind of cycle itself. And, the Mars-Venus thing that repeats every 6.5 years, but there's even ones that repeat every 32 and 64. So you get these larger windows of Mars and Venus as well that kind of shape up the patterns in the sky that we see. But the meaning of this and what's coming through is I think is pretty profound. It has to do with sort of this strong kind of liberation period of creative uniqueness and starting fresh and going your own way and being sovereign and being curious, asking questions and being about going about the world, and through spiritual questing and sort of a creative perspective, shape-shifting into new entities, new beginnings, new paradigms. This kind of is a kind of a world opener, if you will, but it's not about seeding a new path necessarily, but it's about helping others to recognize new knowledge that can come in and to gain perspective, kind of crack open the black and white and the, maybe even the duality of life itself between Gemini and Sagittarius. So I like that, especially with Neptune squaring this whole alignment here, and even Jupiter is to some degree with Juno in this picture a little bit here as well. So something to consider as you're looking at this astrologically, because this kind of a setup is not very common, and it's definitely worth it. It's a time worth meditating on and recognizing and getting out there and if you could, especially if there's no clouds, getting out there and seeing Venus and seeing Mars and this full moon here. So one of the things I like to do with when there's big alignments like this is to look at the Sabian symbol, and this full moon in the sign of Gemini, and this would be the Sabian symbol of the Mars opposition to the sun as well as the full moon itself. This would be 17 Gemini. And the nature of this is the head of a robust youth changes into that of a mature thinker. This comes from the Sabian Oracle by Linda Hill. She draws from Dane Rajar and other other folks that contributed to that. So she really did her research there. Just a really powerful book. But the key words of this is thinking with the higher mind, gaining maturity, making wise decisions, using the system to get what one wants, growing up overnight, having to change whether one likes it or not. So it's like the maturation, the evolution. It's like necessity wins. It may not feel fully rational or logical, but it happens. Learning the lessons that come with age, initiations into adulthood, life-changing events, thinking, pondering, finding a state of calm, refined thinking, and facing reality. So what I get from this is this like Gemini coming of age, if you will, a potential maturation of the masculine, and this full moon helping breathe greater illumination into this space. Now, there's a whole layer there around the natal chart of the United States. So the birth of the United States that was born with Mars and Gemini. And in fact, Mars has three conjunctions, a series of three conjunctions with a natal Mars position of the US. So this is directly impactful into the US chart. With a longer video, I could go into more about that. I do a little bit into the Mars and Gemini video, so you may want to refer back to that. I know Daniel Gimario likes to talk about the US chart a lot. So that, he's got videos at the Turning of the Ages Mystery School that is worth checking out. And I think other astrologers also talk about this Mars transit with the natal Mars of the US. So we could say a evolved version of this expression, not just the full moon, but this Mars and Gemini transit in the US and just within us, is maybe our youth as a nation, as a community and a collective is trying to mature into something beyond what it once was as this youthful country and spirit. Not to say to leave it behind, but to mature it in a way that is actually more in harmony and resonance with the earth and our own evolution of humanity's consciousness. So just, we've got the US, and then we've got humanity as an entire collective, so that there's a maturation of that. And this isn't just a one-day thing. I remember this is something that, from a shamanic astrology perspective, it is about a 25 to 26 month period. So this will go on until the next Mars Sun opposition, which happens in January of 2025. So it's going to be about a little over 25 months from now. So we have that, I think it's January, somewhere in mid-January where that comes in. So a little over 25 months of 2025. So this will apply for that long period of time, not just the one day, December 7th/8th, but something even beyond that, much, much longer. Now, the occultation will be visible in North America and parts of Europe as well in the morning time of Europe, and like just before sunrise. UK, France, Northern Europe, Germany, the Scandinavia area, Iceland, Greenland, Ireland, and parts of Central Europe as well. We'll get this. Now, the East Coast, only part of it, like places like Texas and Florida and the South, Virginia, and Mexico, they will not be able to see the occultation. It'll be close, but they won't be able to see it. So if it's not cloudy, definitely worth checking out. It's not often we get to see an occultation, especially during a full moon. But the occultation happens at 1607 Gemini, for those that are keeping track. So how long does this last? Now, I get this image from skyatnightmagazine.com, and there's a kind of cool article about the astronomy of it all. And I credit Pete Lawrence for this image here from that website. So it lasts about an hour. We can see, from 8:57 to 9:57 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, or 11:57 to 11:57 p.m. to 12:57 a.m. From the 7th into the 8th. So this is an image, symbolic, not exact, but as far as like what it will look like. Mars, of course, is pretty tiny in this image, but it's actually quite bright, and it doesn't really reflect that in this particular image, from visually from just being on the ground. This is more from a kind of a compilation of what the apparent image of what it could look like here. But you can see it hitting like very close to the middle of the moon as it transits this thing. So you get that whole, as the moon kind of goes over that region there. So yes, it'll take 36 seconds for the moon to cover the disk of Mars, and then 34 seconds to be fully revealed from the first appearance to its end. But then about roughly an hour of time in between that, where Mars won't be visible. It'll be behind the moon. So yeah, a pretty rare occurrence. All right. Well, I just want to thank everyone for watching this, and please like and subscribe if you do like this, and share it with those that you feel like could maybe be interested in this. This is what I like to do as part of my own astrology practice. So you can find me at inspiralnexus.com, and of course on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and Instagram as well. And there's my email address. And I'm also at mystaralchemy.com, where I do online courses about the stars with Kaylin Castell. I'm available for personal readings, classes, and events, as well as astrocartography readings, and at inspiralnexus@gmail.com. And you can find more information about shamanic astrology at their, although I list their old site, shamanicastrology.com is now trinityoftheages.com, but it'll redirect you when you type that in, or if you do a search for that. So thank you all again. Go out into the sky, check out this amazing full moon with the Mars opposition, and I'll see you all on the next time. And just a reminder, my Mars Path Seeker Mars class is beginning. So I encourage you all that are interested to sign up for that if it's something that you're inclined to do, that makes sense for you. So I wish you all happy stargazing, and take care, everyone.